why with my plyometric type of work now, I kind of call plyometrics anything with a landing, I suppose, which maybe isn't technically the right definition, but I don't care. But I try and make distinctions between it where, okay, we are going to be nice and stiff and nice and reactive and get off the floor, or we are going to like do like real sinky bounding type of work where like we really yield, really relax down, and then just spring up gently and like allow your body to like almost fall into that position with it and go with it. And I think the mistake that people make is they do all of their plyometric. They don't realize they're making this mistake, or they don't realize they're doing it, but all their plyometric is somewhere in between both of those things. Yeah. So they're not quite stiff enough, and then they're not yielding enough, and they just don't get anything of either of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I agree too. And
so those drops are like the yielding that we do.
Yeah. And Jill will tell you, like, that's when she like was like, oh my God, I finally feel my glutes working.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, you're eccentrically loading them and you're letting them go.
Yep.
You learn to do that. And
and for me, honestly, like the more like you can organize the system, like the less I have to think and it actually just does it on its own, the better. Because I think especially with pelvic floor, like we can get so heady with it that it's actually counterproductive. Like if you're just really focusing on breathing, it's like you get really like kind of stressed out in the process, and that like is counter effective.
Yeah.
So if you just create a movement that naturally makes all of that happen on its own, that's like the jam, as Katie would say.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a problem with that it's always been trained one way or the other. And I think you can bias towards one side of the thing depending on the person's how they present. If you've got someone with a lot of laxity, maybe you need to be doing more like pogos and unloaded sort of concentric biased plyometrics. And then if you've got someone that's got way too much tension in the system and they can't relax, then maybe you need to be doing some of these yielding activities. And then at some point you're doing a little bit of both.
And maybe they need a little bit of both.
That's athleticism, in my opinion. That's the epitome of, well, for me, it was gymnastics, right? Like you can create this quick bounce that creates a lot of power, but you can also roll into the floor and let everything go. And that's that is
variability.
That's parkour. That's why parkour people are so cool, because you can see them like go hop all over the place, and then they come into this landing and they just like their whole body extends the collision for as long as possible, and they just kind of roll out of it. And it's like, how did you survive that landing? It's so incredible.
Please not explode.
They just extended like, and they just go with it. And that's cool. I'm thinking so much more about that in the rehab process now, about like, I think that work comes first for a lot of people, and then they need to get more stiff as they get closer, especially if it's like running and change of direction and stuff. But then it's the opposite, where if you had an Achilles tendon, you might do a lot of the bounding with a lot of yielding work and like just relax, like slouching down into a slouching bound or something like that. And then I might bring in more stiffness work into it, versus let's say it was a knee issue, I might start with more stiffness work, pogos, try and train all them qualities in the lower leg and the foot and the calf and the ankle. And then after that, I might bring in more yielding qualities to like slouching down into the bounds and longer stuff like that, because I'm starting to bring the knee through more range of motion now. So that's how I'm starting to think about it, but I haven't fully figured it out yet. But that's probably the first time I've said it out loud to anyone else.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, now I'm interviewing you.
I can't wait to have you on our podcast.
So we can ask you all these questions. So how come the Achilles you would treat differently in that scenario and flip-flop it from the knee?
Because I might not necessarily, but I if I want to keep in some kind of plyometric qualities, but at the moment they're not able for that. So at the moment, like, if I do a stiff-legged pogo, that is kind of stretching the Achilles, number one, but stretching it quite fast, number two. So if I do a more of a slouching bound where there's longer ground contacts, I'm stretching the Achilles, but not stretching it as fast maybe. And I'm not requiring that recoil, or I'm using a much more concentric muscular strategy rather than an isometric strategy then. So I'm not asking the Achilles to generate as much force for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.